All right, let's talk about something we've all seen, or at least heard the horror stories about. You know, these huge, multi-million-dollar deals that look absolutely perfect on paper, only to completely implode, costing companies a fortune. But what if the reason they fail isn't at all what we think it is?
So let's just ask the big question right up front. When a high-stakes negotiation goes completely off the rails, what's the real culprit? Most people's gut reaction is to point to one thing, the price. But what we're going to explore today suggests that's a really common and, frankly, a very expensive mistake.
And there it is, right from the get-go. High-value deals rarely, if ever, fall apart just because someone couldn't squeeze out a better discount. The real story, the one that's happening behind the scenes, is so much more complicated. It really has almost everything to do with the how, not the how much.
Yeah, they fail because the fundamentals just aren't there. Think about it for a second. $1 million deal isn't just a bigger version of a small buy. It's a different beast entirely. You've got more stakeholders, way longer contracts, and the risk is just exponentially higher. So, using the same casual approach you'd use for a simple office supply order, well, that's just a recipe for disaster.
So, this brings us to the very heart of our explainer today, what we're calling the 7 deadly sins of high-value negotiation. And listen, these aren't just minor missteps. These are fundamental process failures that quietly, and I mean quietly, sabotage deals right from the start. Let's break them down. First up, the all-time classic mistake, being completely obsessed with the sticker price. Teams will spend weeks fighting tooth and nail for a tiny 5% discount, while totally ignoring the long-term risks that could end up costing them 50% of the contract's value down the road. We're talking about things like service failures, project delays, or just terrible exit terms. Just picture this for a second. The project team is high-fiving, celebrating that 5% win. A year later, there's a massive service outage, and they scramble to the contract only to find out, oops, the fine print doesn't cover it. Suddenly, that initial saving is completely and totally meaningless. The point here is crucial. You've got to manage risk before you start optimizing for price. The second sin is just walking into a high-stakes negotiation with no backup plan. Your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, that is your leverage. It's your superpower. If you don't have a credible alternative supplier and you don't have a clear way to get out of the contract if things go wrong, you're not actually negotiating. You're just crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. And this right here shows you just how dangerous that is. Without a workable exit clause, this company was basically held hostage. They had to just swallow a huge 20% price hike because the pain and chaos of trying to leave that supplier was even worse. In these big deals, your exit strategy is your power.
Ah, yes, the internal breakdown. This is what happens when the procurement team goes off and negotiates this fantastic deal all by themselves in a silo, only to have it shut down at the very last second. Why? Because legal or finance or the operations team, the people who actually have to live with this contract, were brought in way too late. I mean, just think of the wasted time here, the internal friction. A 6-week delay isn't just some inconvenience. It can absolutely kill a project's momentum and completely destroy the trust between departments. Alignment isn't something you get at the end. It's something you have to build from day one.
Okay, sin number 4. This one's a silent killer. Verbal agreements. You know how it goes. During a long negotiation, promises are made, concessions are offered, but if they don't make it into that final signed contract, then legally, they just don't exist. This is a huge red flag for auditors and an absolute nightmare if a dispute ever comes up.
I mean, check this out. It's a perfect example. A friendly handshake agreement for free support turns into a 6-figure invoice a year down the road. So the crucial takeaway is simple. If it's not in writing, it never happened. Every single concession, no matter how small it seems, has got to be documented.
All right, on to number 5, and you can see how these all start to connect. This is where you lose control of the deal before you even start talking about money. When you let the supplier define the scope of work, they're naturally going to shape it to protect their own margins. That leaves all these little gray areas that become the source of endless and very expensive change requests later on.
And there you have it, a 40% budget overrun. Why? Because of features that were assumed to be part of the deal. The lesson is crystal clear. You have to own and meticulously define the scope of work from the very beginning. Remember, whoever controls the scope controls the budget. So this sin is kind of like a cousin to that first one we talked about with price. This is all about focusing on that initial purchase price while being totally blind to the total cost of ownership.
We're talking about hidden costs like maintenance, mandatory upgrades, supplier dependency, all the things that can make the cheaper option far, far more expensive in the long run.
This is a classic case of winning the battle but losing the war. That initial saving they were so proud of, it got completely wiped out twice over by costs that a proper total cost of ownership analysis would have sniffed out from a mile away. You have to look at the entire life cycle of the deal, not just the price tag.
And last but not least, our seventh sin, treating governance and approvals like some annoying bureaucratic checkbox you have to rush through at the end. When approvals just get rubber-stamped without any real scrutiny, the company is opening itself up to massive contractual risks and pretty much guaranteeing audit findings down the road.
So let's flip the script on this because this is so important. Strong governance is not there to slow you down. It's a shield. It's what ensures the deal is defensible, that it's compliant, and that it's actually aligned with the business strategy. It's your protection against all those future problems. So, okay, we've walked through the 7 deadly sins. The big question is, how in the world do we avoid them? Well, it really requires a fundamental shift in mindset, moving away from treating negotiation like some informal chat and instead embracing it as a disciplined, structured business process.
I mean, this slide just lays it out perfectly. It's about shifting from being informal to being structured, from being price-focused to being risk-focused, and from just relying on personal relationships to relying on strong, solid governance. Honestly, this is the difference between amateur hour and professional procurement.
So what does this disciplined process actually look like in practice? Well, it's a series of deliberate, proactive actions. It all starts with preparing for different negotiation scenarios before you even sit down at the table. Then it's about aligning all your stakeholders, legal, finance, ops, early and often. No surprises. It means defining your walkaway points with absolute clarity so you know exactly what your limits are. It requires documenting every single concession, turning those verbal promises into solid contractual obligations. And crucially, it means you negotiate risk before you even start talking about the price. Every step builds on the last, creating this solid foundation for the entire deal.
And this really brings us to the big why. Why does all this discipline matter so much? Well, because it's not about winning a single negotiation. It's about building a fortress that actually protects your company's value for the long haul. I really want to land on this powerful quote from our source. The mistakes we've been talking about, they're made in the first few weeks of a negotiation, but the consequences, the cost overruns, the legal fights, the failed projects, they don't show up until years later, when it's just way too late to do anything about it. So I'll just leave you with this question to really think about. Take a hard look at how your own organization handles its biggest deals. Is your process just a conversation, or is it a fortress? Is it truly protecting your long-term value?